Journey into the blood-soaked final days of the Roman Republic through the eyes of its most controversial figure, a man who commanded armies of thousands yet feared the shadows in his own Senate, who conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon but could not escape the daggers of March. This is not the marble statue you know. This is Julius Caesar as he truly lived, a debtor fleeing assassins in the night, a captive mocking pirates who would kill him, a general weeping at the statue of Alexander, and a dictator who saw the blade coming but walked into the Senate anyway. Witness the transformation of Rome's destiny through one man's insatiable hunger for gloria, a word that meant both glory and doom. They say he saw it coming. The soothsayer's warning, the omens in the sky, his wife's nightmare of his blood-soaked toga. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, Gaius Julius Caesar woke knowing he might die. The Senate waited. 23 daggers had been sharpened. And yet, he went. But before those blades found flesh, before the Republic drowned in civil war, before Caesar became the name of emperors, there was a young Roman aristocrat drowning in debt, fleeing for his life through the dark streets of Rome, belonging to a family whose glory had faded to dust. This is where legends are born, not in marble temples, but in the shadows, in fear, in desperation. This is Julius Caesar before the world knew his name. Segment 1. Before the legend. Life in the shadows. Rome in the year 85 BCE was a city eating itself alive. The streets of the Suburra district, where young Gaius Julius Caesar walked, reeked of human waste and rotting fish. The tenement buildings rose 7, 8 stories high, wooden fire traps where the poor lived stacked like cargo, where cooking fires meant entire blocks could become infernos in minutes. This was not the Rome of marble and triumph. This was the Rome that most Romans knew. Cramped, violent, suffocating. The Caesar family lived on the edge of respectability. They claimed descent from Venus herself, from the hero Aeneas who fled burning Troy. They displayed wax masks of their ancestors in the atrium of their modest home. But masks in mythology did not pay debts. Caesar's father held minor magistracies, nothing more. The family name carried weight in conversation, but little else. In Rome, without money, patrician blood was just another burden, a reminder of what you should be, but were not. Young Caesar grew up in the Suburra, surrounded by brothels, taverns, and the constant noise of Rome's working masses. He learned to navigate streets where gangs of rival political factions, the optimates and populace, clashed with clubs and knives. He learned which alleys to avoid after dark, which corners belonged to which protection rackets. The Forum, with its temples and Senate House, was a short walk away, but it might as well have been another world. His father died when Caesar was 15. Suddenly, he was the man of the house, responsible for his mother Aurelia and his sister Julia. Aurelia was formidable, sharp-minded, politically astute, fiercely protective. She had ambitions for her son that their poverty made almost laughable. But she taught him something essential. In Rome, perception was reality. Act like you deserve power, and others begin to believe it. Walk with confidence even when your toga is threadbare. Speak with authority even when your purse is empty. Caesar's education was typical for a young Roman aristocrat, at least in theory. He studied Greek rhetoric, learned to speak in public, memorized Homer and the histories. But he was always aware of what he lacked. Other boys his age, sons of truly wealthy families, had Greek tutors who lived in their homes. They traveled to Athens or Rhodes to study with famous philosophers. They wore purple-trimmed togas and golden rings. Caesar wore ambition like armor, but armor does not fill an empty stomach. Everything changed when he was 16. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, the dictator, returned to Rome after crushing his enemies in the east. Sulla was remaking Rome in blood. He posted prescription lists in the Forum, names of men to be killed, their property confiscated, their families destroyed. Every day, new names appeared. Every day, heads appeared on spikes outside the Senate House. The streets ran with the blood of Rome's elite. Caesar's family was connected to the wrong side. His Aunt Julia had married Gaius Marius, Sulla's greatest enemy. Caesar himself, in an act of either courage or stupidity, had married Cornelia, daughter of Cinna, another of Sulla's enemies, now dead. Sulla sent word, divorce her, refuse, and die. Other men would have divorced her. Survival demanded it. Caesar refused. He gave no great speech, made no public declaration. He simply said no. Then he fled. For months, Caesar moved through the Italian countryside, hiding in the homes of friends, sleeping in forests, always one step ahead of Sulla's death squads. He fell ill with malaria, his body burning with fever, shaking in cold sweats. There were nights when he believed he would die not by the sword but by disease, alone in some stranger's barn, his body thrown into an unmarked grave. He was captured once. Sulla's soldiers dragged him back to Rome. But Caesar's family begged, bribed, called in every favor they had. The Vestal virgins themselves intervened, sacred priestesses whose word carried weight even a dictator hesitated to ignore. Sulla relented, but not without a warning that became famous. In that boy, there are many Mariuses. The dictator saw something in Caesar that others had missed. Not just ambition, Rome was full of ambitious men. Something darker, a refusal to bend, a willingness to risk everything rather than submit. Sulla saw it, and it frightened him. When Sulla finally released his hold on Rome and retired, Caesar did not celebrate. He did not rush back to political life. Instead, he left Rome entirely, sailing east to join the army. He was barely 20, still poor, still haunted by the memory of those months in hiding. He joined the staff of the governor of Asia, not as a general but as a junior officer, learning the brutal mathematics of military command. In the siege of Mytilene, on the island of Lesbos, Caesar distinguished himself. Soldiers remembered him climbing the walls, fighting hand to hand, blood on his armor, shouting orders in a voice that cut through the chaos of battle. He won the civic crown, a wreath of oak leaves given to soldiers who saved the lives of Roman citizens. It was his first taste of glory, and it was intoxicating. But glory came with whispers. Caesar spent time at the court of King Nicomedes of Bithynia, and rumors spread. Vicious, sexual rumors that would follow him for the rest of his life. In Rome's brutal political culture, accusations of sexual passivity could destroy a man's career. Caesar's enemies never let him forget Bithynia. They mocked him in the Senate, wrote crude graffiti on walls, sang songs in the streets. Caesar endured it, but the rage burned. He returned to Rome in his mid-20s, still poor, now a veteran with a decoration but no prospects. The city had changed. Sulla's prescriptions had created a new ruling class, men who had gotten rich buying the confiscated property of the dead. The Senate was more corrupt, more vicious, more divided than ever. The Republic was a fiction maintained by men too wealthy to care about its principles. Caesar began his political career the only way he could, as a prosecutor, bringing cases against corrupt governors. He was brilliant in court, his voice sharp and clear, his arguments devastating. He lost his cases. The men he prosecuted had too much money, too many connections, but he won something more valuable. He won attention. People remembered his name. He was kidnapped by pirates on his way to Rhodes. They demanded 20 talents of silver for his ransom. Caesar laughed at them. He told them he was worth at least 50 talents, and sent his companions to raise the higher amount. For 38 days, he lived among the pirates, joking with them, reciting poetry, exercising on their ship. He told them repeatedly that when he was free, he would return and have them all crucified. They thought he was joking. He was not. The moment his ransom was paid, Caesar raised a fleet, hunted down the pirates, and crucified every one of them. Though as a mercy, he had their throats cut first, quickly, before the slow agony of the cross could begin. This was Caesar, charming, witty, absolutely merciless. Back in Rome, he borrowed. He borrowed staggering amounts of money from Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome, a man who had made his fortune buying burning buildings and the property of Sulla's victims. Caesar spent that money on spectacles, gladiatorial games, public feasts, festivals. He bought popularity the way other men bought bread. He made himself indispensable to the masses while drowning in debt. By his 30s, Caesar owed so much money that creditors waited outside his house. There were mornings when he could not leave without being accosted, threatened, humiliated. He owed more than he could ever hope to repay through legal means. He needed war. He needed conquest. He needed the wealth that came from plundering provinces. But first, he needed power. And in Rome, power required climbing the cursus honorum, the ladder of political offices, each more expensive than the last. Caesar threw himself into the climb with desperate energy. He won election as quaestor, then aedile, then Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, a position of immense prestige. He won that election through bribery so massive that he told his mother, on the morning of the vote, that he would return as Pontifex Maximus or not at all, as an exile fleeing his creditors. He won. He always won. But the debts kept growing. The enemies kept multiplying. And in the Senate, the old families watched this upstart Caesar with cold hatred. They remembered Marius. They remembered Sulla's warning. They saw a man who would not stop, could not stop, who would risk civil war itself rather than accept humiliation. They were right. Segment 2. Rise of the Warrior, the Path to Glory. The year was 61 BCE, and Julius Caesar had finally achieved significant office, propraetor of further Spain. But he could not leave Rome. His creditors physically blocked his departure, demanding payment before he could take up his governorship. Caesar went to Crassus again, and Crassus provided enough financial guarantees to free him. Caesar left Rome knowing that he had to return with wealth or die in exile. Spain transformed him. As governor, he had legal authority to wage war, and war meant plunder. Caesar led his legions against the hill tribes of Lusitania and Galaetia, regions that had never fully submitted to Rome. He did not fight defensive campaigns. He attacked, pushed deeper into hostile territory, moved his legions with speed that exhausted his own men but left his enemies reeling. The Spanish campaigns were brutal. Hill tribes fought from fortified positions, using terrain they knew intimately. Caesar's legions suffered in the summer heat, struggled with supply lines stretched thin across hostile country. But Caesar learned. He learned to read terrain like a language, to anticipate where an enemy would make a stand, to use his cavalry as a shock force that could turn a stalemated battle into a rout. More importantly, he learned to command loyalty. Roman soldiers were not mindless automatons. They were citizens, many of them veterans who had served under multiple commanders. They judged their generals harshly. A general who wasted their lives in pointless assaults, who let them go hungry while he ate well, who failed to reward them properly. Such a general might find himself abandoned or worse. Caesar made himself loved. He shared the hardships of the march, went without sleep when his men went without sleep, visited the wounded personally, remembered names and faces. When the campaign succeeded, he distributed plunder generously, not just to officers, but to common legionaries. He returned to Rome not just with wealth, but with the loyalty of men who would follow him anywhere. He paid his debts. He celebrated a triumph, parading through Rome with Spanish captives and cartloads of gold. He was 40 years old, no longer a young man in a hurry, but a proven commander with ambitions that terrified the Senate. They tried to block him, tried to force him to choose between his triumph and running for consul, Rome's highest office. Caesar chose the consulship. He won, and he won big. But he did not win alone. Caesar had formed an alliance, unofficial, secret, never acknowledged publicly, with Pompey the Great and Marcus Crassus, the three most powerful men in Rome, each needing what the others had. Pompey had military glory but was politically outmaneuvered by the Senate. Crassus had wealth but craved military success. Caesar had neither but had the audacity to bind them together. History would call it the First Triumvirate. In truth, it was a conspiracy to control the Republic. As consul, Caesar pushed through laws that enraged the Senate. Land redistribution for Pompey's veterans, confirmation of Pompey's eastern settlements, tax relief for Crassus's business interests. He did it through intimidation, through mobs in the forum, through sheer force of will. His co-consul, Bibulus, opposed him so futilely that wags joked it was the consulship of Julius and Caesar rather than Caesar and Bibulus. But consulship lasted only a year. After that, former consuls typically received a governorship of a peaceful province, a chance to recoup the massive debts incurred during their year in office. Caesar demanded something different. He demanded Gaul. Gaul was not one place, but many. Cisalpine Gaul in northern Italy, already Roman. Transalpine Gaul, the southern strip of modern France, tenuously held. And beyond that, the vast, wild lands of Free Gaul, inhabited by Celtic tribes who had once sacked Rome itself. The Senate, manipulated by Caesar's allies and eager to get him out of Rome, gave him an unprecedented command: 5 years as governor of Gaul, with 4 legions. They thought they were getting rid of him. They gave him an army. Caesar arrived in Gaul in 58 BCE with clear purpose. He would conquer it all. The Helvetii tribe gave him his excuse, migrating across Roman territory. Caesar intercepted them, fought a brutal battle, slaughtered thousands, and drove the survivors back to their homeland. But he did not stop there. He turned his legions toward the Germanic tribes crossing the Rhine, then toward the Belgic tribes in the north. Each victory led to the next campaign, each campaign to another conquest. The Gallic Wars lasted 8 years and redrew the map of Europe. Caesar fought in forests so thick his soldiers could barely see 10 feet ahead, in swamps where men sank to their waists in mud, on frozen rivers in winters so cold that men died standing up, their bodies turned to ice. He built bridges across the Rhine in 10 days, engineering marvels that awed both his own men and his enemies. He invaded Britain twice, crossing the ocean to an island at the edge of the known world. He was not merely a conqueror. He was a writer, documenting his campaigns in clear, elegant Latin prose that made his victories seem inevitable, his decisions always correct, his enemies always in the wrong. His commentaries on the Gallic War were propaganda, but propaganda so skillfully written that it is still read today. He sent copies back to Rome, where they were read aloud in the Forum, making him a hero to the masses even as he fought hundreds of miles away. But the Gallic Wars were not glorious adventures. They were wars of annihilation. When the Belgic tribes resisted, Caesar besieged their fortresses, starved them into surrender, then sold entire populations into slavery. When the Eburones tribe ambushed and destroyed one of his legions, Caesar responded with a campaign of extermination, burning every village, killing every warrior, leaving their lands a wasteland. The siege of Avaricum saw Caesar's legions storm a Celtic town in the middle of winter. His soldiers, maddened by hunger and the deaths of their comrades, butchered everyone inside: men, women, children, the elderly. Of 40,000 people, only 800 escaped. Caesar wrote about it in his commentaries with clinical detachment, as if recording the weather. Yet his soldiers adored him. He made them rich. Every campaign brought plunder, and Caesar distributed it generously. He doubled their pay, gave bonuses after victories, ensured they were fed even when he went hungry. When they were tired, he pushed them beyond what they thought possible, and when they succeeded, he praised them as the finest soldiers Rome had ever fielded. The siege of Alesia in 52 BCE was his masterpiece. Vercingetorix, the young war leader of the Arverni tribe, had united the Gallic tribes in a final desperate rebellion. He retreated to the hilltop fortress of Alesia with 80,000 warriors and waited for relief armies to arrive. Caesar did the impossible. He built 2 rings of fortifications, one facing inward to contain Vercingetorix, one facing outward to hold off the relief army. His legions, fewer than 50,000 men, were trapped between 2 much larger forces. The battle lasted for days. Gallic warriors attacked from both sides simultaneously. Caesar rode from crisis point to crisis point, his scarlet cloak visible to his men, his voice cutting through the chaos. At the moment of greatest danger, when it seemed the outer fortifications would break, Caesar personally led a cavalry charge that shattered the Gallic relief army. Vercingetorix, watching from Alesia, knew it was over. The young Gallic king rode out of Alesia in full armor, laid down his weapons at Caesar's feet, and surrendered. Caesar had him sent to Rome in chains, where he would wait 6 years in a cell before being strangled as part of Caesar's triumph. The war was over. Gaul was Rome's. Caesar commanded legions that worshipped him, had wealth beyond measure, and had forged himself into one of the greatest military minds in history. But while Caesar conquered Gaul, Rome was tearing itself apart. Clodius and Milo, rival gang leaders, turned the city into a war zone. Crassus, seeking glory to match Caesar's, invaded Parthia and died in the desert, his head used as a prop in a theatrical performance. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, drifted toward the Senate, toward the old families who hated Caesar. The triumvirate was dead. The Senate gave Caesar a choice: disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution, or be declared an enemy of the state. It was not really a choice. As a private citizen, Caesar would be destroyed by his enemies in the courts, bankrupted, exiled, or killed. With his legions, he had a chance. On January 10th, 49 BCE, Caesar stood at the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy. To cross with an army was treason. To not cross was suicide. He crossed. Alia iacta est. The die is cast, and the Republic died with him. Segment 3. Myths, Secrets, and Unsolved Mysteries. There is a story told about Julius Caesar that historians cannot quite verify, but cannot quite dismiss. It happened in Spain, years before the Gallic Wars, when Caesar was still a young man scrambling for recognition and drowning in debt. He was traveling through a small town and saw a statue of Alexander the Great. He stopped, stared at it for a long moment, and began to weep. His companions were bewildered. Why was their commander crying? Caesar gestured at the statue and said, "At my age, Alexander had conquered the known world, and I have accomplished nothing." Whether this actually happened or is a legend created later, it reveals something essential about Caesar. He lived in the shadow of Alexander, measuring himself against a man who had died 3 centuries earlier. Alexander had conquered the Persian Empire by the time he was 33. Caesar at 33 was a minor magistrate with enormous debts. The anxiety of that comparison drove Caesar for the rest of his life. But there were older shadows, deeper myths that shaped Caesar's understanding of himself and his destiny. He claimed descent from Venus through her son Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled burning Troy and founded the Roman race. This was not unusual. Many Roman families claimed divine ancestry. What was unusual was how seriously Caesar took it. He built a temple to Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother, in the Forum. He wore a ring carved with her image. In his mind, his success was not just personal achievement, but divine destiny. The Romans believed in omens, in signs from the gods written in the flight of birds, the entrails of sacrificed animals, the movement of stars. Caesar was a rationalist in many ways, a man who trusted engineering and logistics more than prayers. Yet he could not quite escape the superstitions of his age. Before major battles, he consulted haruspices, priests who read the future in the livers of sheep. He paid attention to dreams, his own and others. In the months before his assassination, the omens multiplied. A soothsayer named Spurina warned him to beware the Ides of March. Caesar dismissed it publicly, but he did not forget. Horses he had dedicated to the gods after crossing the Rubicon refused to eat and wept tears, or so the stories say. Lights appeared in the sky, strange and flickering. Birds of night nested in the Forum at midday. The doors of his house flew open in the middle of the night with no wind to move them. The night before his death, Caesar attended a dinner at the home of Lepidus. The conversation turned to the question, what is the best kind of death? Caesar, according to witnesses, said, a sudden one. Hours later, his wife Calpurnia woke from a nightmare, screaming. She had dreamed that the pediment of their house collapsed, and Caesar lay dying in her arms, blood soaking his toga. She begged him not to go to the Senate that morning. Caesar hesitated. The superstitious part of his mind, the part that honored Venus and consulted haruspices, urged caution. But another senator, Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, arrived and mocked him. Would the great Caesar be ruled by a woman's dreams? Would he show weakness before the Senate? Decimus told him that the Senate was preparing to offer him the title of king, outside Italy, where it would not offend Roman sensibilities. How could he refuse that? Caesar went. Spurina was waiting outside the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting. The Ides of March have come, Caesar said to him, a jest to show he did not fear prophecy. I, Caesar, Spurina replied, but not gone. The question that has haunted historians ever since. Did Caesar know? Not about the specific conspiracy. He could not have known the details and walked into that room. But did he know, in some deeper sense, that his power had become unsustainable? That he had pushed the Republic so far that the only resolution was his death? There is evidence he suspected something. In the days before his assassination, he dismissed his Spanish bodyguard. He walked the streets with minimal protection. He ignored warnings, brushed off concerns. Some historians believe he had grown tired, that 4 years of civil war and 2 years of reforming Rome had exhausted him. He was 55 years old, suffering from epilepsy, increasingly isolated by his own power. Perhaps he chose not to see the danger because part of him welcomed it. Another mystery surrounds Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. She arrived in Rome in 46 BCE, after Caesar had defeated her brother in Egypt's civil war and restored her to the throne. She brought with her a child she claimed was Caesar's son, Caesarion, Little Caesar. She stayed in Rome for nearly 2 years, living in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, hosting banquets attended by senators and their wives. The Romans despised her. She was foreign, Egyptian, a queen in a city that had overthrown its kings 5 centuries earlier. Rumors swirled that Caesar planned to move the capital to Alexandria, that he would marry Cleopatra and rule as a Hellenistic monarch rather than a Roman magistrate. These rumors were almost certainly false, but in Rome, perception mattered more than truth. What remains mysterious is Caesar's true feelings for Cleopatra. Was it love, as Shakespeare would later imagine? Was it political calculation, binding Egypt to Rome through personal connection? Or was it simpler than that? Two brilliant, ruthless people recognizing something in each other, a kinship of ambition and will? Caesar never acknowledged Caesarion as his son, at least not legally. Roman law did not recognize children from foreign marriages, but he placed a golden statue of Cleopatra in the temple of Venus Genetrix, his divine ancestress. That statue stood in Rome's most sacred space, a foreign queen honored as if she were divine. What was Caesar saying with that gesture? Historians still argue. There are artifacts, too, that carry their own mysteries. Caesar's signet ring, which he used to seal letters and official documents, has never been found. It would have been one of the most recognizable objects in the ancient world, yet it vanished after his death. Did someone steal it? Destroy it? Keep it hidden as a relic? The sword Caesar carried, or one of them, at least, supposedly survived into late antiquity. Trajan, the emperor who ruled in the early 2nd century CE, claimed to possess it, but by the Middle Ages, it had vanished. Medieval legends placed it in various treasuries, but none of the swords claimed to be Caesar's have ever been authenticated. Most mysterious of all is what happened to Caesar's body after his cremation. He was burned in the Forum, on a pyre built by the grieving masses who rioted after his death. His ashes were supposed to be interred in the Temple of Divus Julius, built by Augustus on the spot where his body was burned. But no archaeological excavation has ever found remains definitively identified as Caesar's. The temple was destroyed and rebuilt several times. Were his ashes lost in one of those destructions? Or were they removed, hidden, kept as relics by some unknown hand? The Romans believed that great men did not truly die, that their spirits lingered, that their deeds echoed through eternity. Caesar himself played with this idea. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar that, with modifications, we still use today. Every year, when January becomes February becomes March, we live by Caesar's decree. He made time itself Roman. And there is the comet. In 44 BCE, months after Caesar's death, a comet appeared in the sky during games held in his honor. The Romans called it the Julian star, proof that Caesar had ascended to godhood. Augustus seized on this sign, declaring Caesar divine, building temples in his honor. The man who refused to be called king in life became a god in death. But the greatest mystery is simpler and more profound. How did one man break a republic that had endured for nearly 500 years? Rome had survived Hannibal, had conquered the Mediterranean, had absorbed Greek culture without losing Roman identity. Yet Julius Caesar, in 1 decade of civil war and 2 years of reform, shattered the system so completely that it could never be rebuilt. Was it Caesar's genius? His ambition? Or was the republic already dead, kept standing only by momentum and myth, waiting for someone bold enough to push it over? Caesar himself might not have known the answer. He fought a civil war to avoid prosecution, seized dictatorial power to restore order, and prepared new campaigns to escape the mess he had created at home. He was always moving forward because standing still meant confronting questions he could not answer. The Ides of March answered them for him. Segment 4. Power, Glory, and the World They Left Behind. The Senate chamber was located in the Theater of Pompey, a massive complex built by Caesar's former ally and later enemy. The irony would have pleased Pompey had he lived to see it. Caesar was murdered in a building commemorating the man he had defeated in civil war, at the foot of a statue of Pompey himself. 23 senators and former magistrates participated in the assassination. They called themselves the Liberators, believing they were saving the Republic from tyranny. Marcus Junius Brutus, whom Caesar loved like a son, struck one of the blows. "Et tu, Brute?" the later stories claim Caesar said. "You too, Brutus?" More reliable sources suggest Caesar said nothing, merely pulled his toga over his head as the daggers fell, choosing to die unseen. His body lay where it fell for several hours. Senators who had not been part of the conspiracy fled in terror. The liberators marched to the Capitol, waving bloody daggers, shouting that they had killed a tyrant. They expected the people of Rome to rejoice. Instead, the city went silent with shock. Mark Antony, Caesar's closest ally, retrieved the body. The funeral was held in the Forum, and Antony displayed Caesar's blood-stained toga, pointing to each rent in the fabric, counting the 23 wounds. The crowd's grief turned to rage. Riots erupted. The liberators fled the city. Within months, they would be fighting for their lives against Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, and his allies. But in the immediate aftermath, before the Second Triumvirate and the Battle of Philippi and the rise of Augustus, there was confusion. The Senate had not known what to do with Caesar in life, and they did not know what to do with him in death. Some senators wanted him condemned as a tyrant, his acts nullified, his memory cursed. Others recognized that too many of their own positions and reforms depended on laws Caesar had passed. Condemn Caesar, and you potentially invalidate years of governance. They compromised, as politicians do. Caesar's acts would remain valid. His assassins would not be prosecuted. The Republic would continue as if nothing had happened. It was a fantasy, and everyone knew it. The Roman elite, the senators and their families who controlled the Republic, lived in a world utterly divorced from the soldiers who fought Rome's wars. They owned vast estates worked by slaves captured in Caesar's conquests. They lived in marble villas on the Palatine Hill, attended by Greek secretaries and philosophers. They spent their days in elaborate meals, their evenings at the theater or baths, their wealth so vast they could not spend it in a lifetime. Yet these same men depended on generals like Caesar to provide the slaves, the grain, the gold that maintained their lifestyle. They feared military power but needed it, despised the generals but relied on them. This contradiction defined the late Republic and made civil war inevitable. Caesar understood this better than most. As dictator, he passed laws that terrified the Senate. He settled his veterans on land in Italy, creating communities of armed men loyal to him personally. He expanded the Senate, adding men from Gaul and Spain, diluting the power of old Roman families. He reformed the grain dole, reducing the number of recipients but ensuring those who received it were truly needy. He reformed the calendar, rebuilt cities, planned massive public works. The Senate saw a man reshaping Rome in his image, and they could not distinguish between reform and tyranny. When Caesar had himself declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life, they saw the end of the Republic. They were not entirely wrong. But Caesar also showed mercy, clementia, to a degree that baffled and frustrated his enemies. After defeating Pompey's forces, he pardoned most of the senators who had fought against him. Brutus himself had fought for Pompey and was forgiven, welcomed back into Caesar's circle. Cassius, another of the assassins, had been at Philippi and was pardoned. Cicero, who wrote letters hoping for Caesar's defeat, was treated with respect. Caesar's mercy was a problem. It left his enemies alive, gave them time to conspire, allowed them to believe he was weak. A harsher man would have executed the liberators before they could strike. But Caesar wanted to be loved, not feared. He wanted to prove that Rome could be ruled without terror, that his power came from the people's will, not the sword. It was his greatest virtue and his fatal mistake. The world Caesar left behind was fundamentally different from the one he was born into. The Republic, as a functioning system of government, was dead. It would take another 13 years of civil war before Octavian emerged as Augustus, the first emperor, but the Republic died with Caesar on the Ides of March. Roman expansion, which had created the crisis in the first place, continued. Caesar's conquest of Gaul brought millions of people and vast territories under Roman control. Britain, which Caesar had invaded twice without fully conquering, would be absorbed within a century. The entire Mediterranean world became one political entity, governed from Rome, united by Roman law, defended by Roman legions. But the nature of those legions changed. Before Caesar, soldiers served Rome, swearing loyalty to the Senate and people. After Caesar, Soldiers served their generals. The legions became personal armies, tools of ambitious men. This transformation, which Caesar exemplified but did not create, shaped the next 5 centuries of Roman history. Caesar's veterans, settled on land throughout Italy and the provinces, became a permanent class of soldier farmers, loyal to the memory of the man who had enriched them. Their sons would serve under Augustus. Their grandsons would push Rome's borders to the Danube, the Rhine, the deserts of North Africa. They carried with them the memory of Caesar, his tactical brilliance, his way of inspiring loyalty, his ruthless efficiency. The literature of Rome was transformed by Caesar's death. Cicero, who despised Caesar but was too cautious to join the conspiracy, wrote obsessively about the Republic, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Virgil, writing under Augustus, created the Aeneid, an epic poem that traced Rome's origins to Troy and claimed divine destiny for Roman rule. Virgil's Aeneas is in many ways a reflection of Caesar, a man who sacrifices personal happiness for duty, who founds a civilization, who walks the line between human and divine. Later emperors imitated Caesar, took his name as a title. Caesar became Kaiser in German, Tsar in Russian. For 2,000 years, his name meant supreme power. The man who refused to be called king became the definition of absolute rule. But what did Caesar himself want? This question has occupied historians for 2 millennia. Was he a visionary who saw that the Republic could not survive in its current form and tried to create something better? Was he an opportunist who seized power because he could? Was he, as Cicero believed, a monster who destroyed Rome's freedom to satisfy his own ambition? The truth is probably simpler and sadder. Caesar was a Roman aristocrat who wanted what all Roman aristocrats wanted: gloria, dignitas, the respect of his peers, and the adoration of the people. He wanted his name remembered, his achievements celebrated, his family honored. He pursued these goals with more brilliance, more ruthlessness, more success than anyone else. And in doing so, he destroyed the system that made such pursuits possible. In the end, the conspirators were right about one thing. Caesar had become incompatible with the Republic. He was too successful, too popular, too necessary. The Senate could not control him, could not limit him, could not imagine Rome without him. That was intolerable to men who believed in collective rule, in term limits, in the subordination of individual ambition to public good. But the liberators were wrong about what would happen after they killed him. They thought Rome would breathe free again, that the Republic would resume, that Caesar would be remembered as a cautionary tale. Instead, his death sparked civil wars that killed hundreds of thousands, that ended with a system more autocratic than anything Caesar had created, that transformed Rome from a republic into an empire. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, learned from the assassination. He accumulated the same powers Caesar had held, but wrapped them in republican language. He was not dictator but princeps, first citizen. He did not abolish the Senate, but made it irrelevant. He created an empire while pretending to restore the Republic, and he ruled for 41 years, dying peacefully in his bed, mourned by all Rome. Caesar's legacy was not the Republic he destroyed, but the empire that rose from its ruins. An empire that would last 5 centuries in the West, 15 centuries in the East. An empire that shaped European law, language, architecture, governance. An empire that converted to Christianity and spread that faith across continents. An empire that fell, but left behind structures and ideas that still shape our world. Stand in the Roman Forum today, and you can see the Temple of Divus Julius, built by Augustus on the spot where Caesar's body was burned. It is a ruin now, columns standing against the sky, surrounded by the remains of other temples, other forums, the layers of Roman history piled on top of each other. Tourists photograph it, guides tell the story, and Caesar's name echoes one more time. 15 miles away, in a small valley, archaeologists continue excavating Alesia, the hilltop fortress where Vercingetorix made his last stand. They have found the remains of Caesar's fortifications, the engineering marvel that decided the Gallic Wars. They have found weapons, coins, the detritus of siege warfare. They have found bones. In a museum in Naples, they preserve a statue found in Pompeii, buried by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE. It shows Caesar in middle age, his face lean and sharp, his expression calculating. The sculptor captured something essential: intelligence, ambition, a hint of cruelty. It is one of the few portraits made during his lifetime, and it does not show a god or a hero. It shows a man. That man changed the world, not because he wanted to destroy the Republic, but because he wanted to be great. He wanted Gloria, and he got it. He wanted immortality, and he got that too. But the price was higher than he imagined. The Republic died, his friends betrayed him, and the world he knew dissolved into blood and chaos. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar woke knowing he might die. The omens were clear, the warnings explicit. He could have stayed home, could have let the Senate meet without him, could have lived another day, another month, another year. But he went, because in the end, Caesar could not help being Caesar. He could not stop moving forward, could not accept humiliation or defeat, could not be anything less than what he had made himself. The daggers were waiting. History was watching. And Caesar, for all his brilliance and ambition, was only human. The 23 wounds testify to that. He bled like any man. He died like any man. But his name lived on. Caesar, the word for power, for empire, for the man who broke the world and remade it in his image. 2,000 years later, we still speak his name. We still tell his story. We still argue about whether he was hero or villain, whether he saved Rome or destroyed it, whether the Republic died with him or was already dead when he arrived. The questions remain unanswered because they are unanswerable, because Caesar was too complex, too contradictory, too human to fit into simple categories. But this much is certain: he lived, he conquered, he died, and the world was never the same. That is what it means to be a legend. That is what it means to be Julius Caesar.